So we made this book, and we're really excited to tell you all about it. We have 4 readers doing some excerpts from their stories, and it's great. There's nothing else to say. And Dale Beran is reading this.
Hello, everyone. I'm reading my Twilight fan fiction. If you guys don't know what Twilight is, it's a young adult novel that documents the love affair between a teenage girl and a 100-year-old vampire she meets in her high school. When I read this book, if you see the films or if you read the book, it's really deeply offensive. The values in it are really, really terrible. The idea that the main character is sort of like a victim who the main idea is that the vampire finds the young teenage girl the most delicious item in the whole universe, and her response to this is that she wants him to eat her. And she's like, that would be great. I don't know if you'd want you to eat me. And so that's the tension in the book. And sort of the main, sort of the centerpiece of the book, the part that the author found out wrote first, is this moment when he first sees her. She first sees him at school, and he obviously looks like a vampire. And then she witnesses a supernatural power. And then he leads her out into the forest, and he shows her what happens to a vampire when finally, they're in the Northwest, so there's no sunlight. And finally, what happens to a vampire when there's sunlight? And the sunlight comes through the field, and it hits his beautiful chest, and it starts to sparkle like diamonds. And then she's in love, but they can't touch, because if they touch, then he will eat her. He wants to eat her so bad. So for my fan fiction, I reversed it so the book is told from the perspective of a teenage girl, which tells you nothing because she's so unperceptive and so credulous. So I reversed it and told it from the perspective of a 100-year-old vampire, and made it so that what he's telling you is 100% lies. Of course, the only reason a 100-year-old vampire goes to high school is to seduce children who are in the high school. So he's sort of trapped by his lies. So I'll read the portion where he first sees her in the high school, and then the portion where he reveals his beautiful chest and he starts to sparkle. I made it so that he's not a vampire, of course. He just has a disease that makes him weird. All right. So this is when he first sees her and just finds her in the high school, and he's looking for a young girl to seduce. The first year of my search was not very productive. I slept with 5 or 6 students, experimenting with a few boys as well before nearly giving up. But when I returned the next year, I finally discovered a child that would suit my purposes. Her name was Isabella, consecrated to God, though she shortened it to the more secular Bella. She had just transferred to school from one of those airy, insubstantial places defined by its airport, like Denver or Phoenix. We shared biology class together. One thing that delighted me about her was that because she was a transfer student, she affected a snooty air of big city superiority. Much of the curriculum overlapped with her previous semester, so she imagined herself as sort of learned expert in matters of cell biology and Wuthering Heights. I liked to watch her squirm and huff impatiently at the back of the class as our instructor tried in vain to educate her. She would pass notes, bury her head in her filthy sleeves, or just stare out the window across the courtyard to the other parts of the school as her big, sulky lower lip sank further and further to signal to all around her the eternal dominion of ignorance over every part of her body. Her body structure reminded me of those Art Nouveau renditions of Diana where the goddess's shaggy hunting dogs were replaced by sleek greyhounds, and likewise, her naked body loses its broad hips and becomes one long-limbed, curved shape to match her bow. And indeed, Isabella's whole skeleton had a sort of pert, front-leaning motion to it, which I think she felt self-conscious about and so obscured by permanently hunching her shoulders. She was possessed of 2 prominent rabbit-like upper teeth and a slight overbite to match her forward-pointing face. Her skin was very pale, though it retained the slowly fading blush from what must have been a summer in the sun. But her most prominent features were those that expressed her profound, almost mystically dissipated spirit. Her eyes, for instance, flashed and sparkled back at you, cognizant of nothing, resisting everything, while somehow holding in scope and space and a mirror the entirety of what you offered. Her small, wet, pink mouth hung open almost constantly, signaling inaccessible access, 1,000 different shapes symbolizing nothing, each tracing the same mawkish void of boredom and dissatisfaction. Her beauty mingled somehow with her blankness so that she would simultaneously attract and consume all the light and energy and vibrancy in a room by doing nothing, thinking nothing. All right, and now this is later when he's leading her into the forest to reveal the fact that he's a vampire. My story is called Why Light instead of Twilight. I walked quickly through the forest over piles of soft pine needles and thick clumps of bright green ferns. Bella followed me as she would now almost anywhere. It was late November, but warm. Slowly over the course of the past few weeks, I had entwined the knots of her desire with my lies. She now believed that I was, of all things, a vampire. The brilliant invention was hers, not mine, suggested, I suppose, by her internet search engine or library of young adult novels. If I had hit upon the idea to impersonate a monster from a popular romantic fiction, I probably would have chosen a zombie. The cocktail of fungi and viruses which had infected my vital organs did, in a sense, kill and reanimate each of the cells in my body. Bella believed I was leading her into the forest to murder her. The idea seemed somehow to the tortured reason of her teenage mind, preferable to the more obvious possibility that she was trapping herself in a place where she could no longer object to my advances. Above the pines, but beneath the snow caps, we would inhabit, briefly, a historyless place, springing only into the present where faint objections would soon melt into the warm rock. The absurd fictions of vampires, bloodletting, murder, and temptation, which I think at heart she did not really truly believe, allowed us to cloak our intentions not so much from ourselves as from each other. We were not traveling to a sublime and rarefied place as she imagined, but an ordinary, though previously untrammeled spot a former age would have called her modesty. I had lost the path long ago and was a little bit turned around. Finally, as luck would have it, a copse opened up before us. The clouds broke in that steamy, almost violent way they do in the northwest, and the once feeble light now poured with wild, vibrant abandon into the grove. It was lined with an expanse of immense wildflowers, whose cups all nodded in vigorous agreement with the breeze. I took her hand. She gasped. The exertion from the hike had worked the waste fungus left in my skin cells to the surface of my body. My skin shined brilliantly with a granulated sheen. Oh, I used the same dialogue. So the dialogue is Stephanie Myers. I don't scare you, I asked, trying to parlay the phenomenon into something foreboding and vampiric. No more than usual, she replied coquettishly, running her fingers up my arm. Do you mind? She asked. No, I answered. You can't imagine how that feels. I turned my hand around to grab her by the waist, but she hesitated. Sorry, I mumbled awkwardly. It's too easy to be myself with you. She opened the palm of my hand and scrutinized the dead grit inside. Tell me what you're thinking, I exhorted, attempting to draw her attention away from the substance. A wave of panic rushed over my body. Several weeks earlier, I had suddenly recalled I had convinced her that among my supernatural powers was the ability to read minds. But then my anxiety subsided. When she had looked disturbed by this idea, I had stipulated that the rule applied only to all minds except hers. It's true in the book. It's so strange for me not knowing, I amended. You know the rest of us feel that way all the time, she said. It's a hard life, I observed stupidly. She didn't reply. I could see doubt growing in her eyes. Tell me, I insisted. I was wishing I could know what you were thinking, she replied. And, I prompted, I was wishing that I could believe you were real, and I was wishing that I wasn't afraid. I don't want you to be afraid. I don't want you to be afraid, I assured her. Well, that's not exactly the fear I meant, though. That's certainly something to think about, she answered in her distinctly inarticulate fashion. What are you afraid of then, I inquired, deciding instead of drawing closer to back away from her. I had also intimated to her earlier that I could smell her blood. It was part of the game we played, a according to the vampire rules I made up, her blood was possessed of the most rarefied and sublime scent in all the world. It drove me into the throes of wild passion. This meant now and again I would have to dart away from her when the temptation to bite into her like a piece of fruit became too strong. "I'm sorry, Edward," she called to me, looking hopelessly dejected, believing, I suppose, that she was tempting me so much it was cruel. "Oh, I'm sorry." "Give me a moment," I told her, trying to look as though I was steeling myself against her awful murder. I walked even farther away, then after a suitable amount of time, returned. "I'm so very sorry," I reported. "Would you understand what I meant if I said I was only human?" She was frozen with real fear, stricken with the belief that I was about to eat her. What were the limits to her credulity, I wondered. Could I suggest anything to her? "You can't outrun me," I assured her, tearing at the branches of a nearby tree, "or fight me off, but don't be afraid." I scooped her up into my arms. "I promise," I began, letting my promise hang there, but what did I promise? What would I vow to her? "I promise not to hurt you," I finally supplied. "Don't be afraid," I listed. "Please forgive me." But after that, I couldn't think of any more trite or villainous sentiments to parrot. I looked at her and saw it become unnecessary. She could no longer hear me. She had been driven into a sort of wild frenzy by my lies. Our game had split her in two. Two thoughts ran in her, two explanations, two actions, two ideas coursing in her body. One so absurd it couldn't be true, the other so terrifying she didn't want it to be real. But which was which? How were we together if not in our unwillingness? Where were we turning if not inward to face one another? It fell upon us a burden of intention that I didn't have the strength to touch her. It would mean having to keep this fantasy propped up for as long as it would endure. Not really for her sake, but for my own. No, it would endure despite anything I did. I was its steward until she returned, but where did she go? When she was transported by all this pleasure, it wasn't a real place. She moved into and out of herself, entering a little smokehouse of denial, a votary shrine which stripped away mind, body, thoughts, and soul, until she was no longer Isabella, consecrated to God, just Bella, beautiful. A reliquary in which I kept all my reclaimed desire. The parts of her I never wanted to touch. Everything I'm not touching still, except she didn't. Why would she, those? Not even darkness there, but light. Why light?
So I couldn't decide the order, so I decided just to do alphabetical order, but I forgot to tell the readers that. So are you okay going next?
Yeah.
Okay. What?
How come we forgot a piece of that podium?
Oh, you can use the podium.
Seems to impart a lot of authority.
Yeah. Rjyan Kidwell is next.
Okay, so I wrote about the Silver Surfer, and there's like a real thrilling twist in the story, and I'm starting after that, so this is a spoiler. But you could still read it. You might need to read it twice anyway. I don't know how coherent it is on the first reading. But anyway. Back at the smoldering hill where the Children's Crusade had taken a first world nuclear deterrent full in the face, the brightest among them was still in one piece, kneeling. His clothes had incinerated completely, but there remained a few splotches of his pink skin still clinging to the unscathed silver tissue beneath them. He brought himself erect as if he had merely stopped to look for a penny in the grass, and immediately a blinding sliver of light dove out of the exosphere, dropping from a speed incalculably greater than the speed of gravity to a full stop right in front of the insuperable poet. It hovered 1.5 feet above the ground, undulating slightly, visibly aware and excited that it would soon be freed from the 25,000-mile circuit it had faithfully traced for the past year. And as the shockwave from the second intercepted ICBM rippled towards them, Norrin stepped onto the quivering chrome manta and shot skyward, unable to suppress a smile when the warmth of the radiation hit his face. The Skyrider left Earth in one smooth arc that brought him cleanly through the bulk of the asteroid belt before launching off the gravitational field of Pallas and cresting among the ice particles that encircle Saturn. He didn't need to scan the stars for very long to find his faithful pet, the hungry old hound who even now began to turn his titanic head towards the sudden enormous release of energy transpiring in our atmosphere. By the time it would take him to reach his next meal, Norrin would be walking among the other children of the Zenlavians in the Orion Arm. That wasn't his next destination, though. As earth-shattering an event this might have been for us, Norrin was simply taking care of an errand so he could get back on his board and ride. Something about that last place, though, felt grosser than usual. Not just the synthetic chemicals and electromagnetic radiation that they poured into every last square mile of their planet's surface, or the disgusting simulated food most of them ate, but something that wasn't even physical. It probably wasn't them at all, actually. Clearly there would be some kind of karmic retribution for his unerring preference for feeding Galactus and all Zenlavians' diet, even if it were just a self-induced psychological one. Yet there had been few planets that didn't seem to justify Norrin's feelings about the Zenlavian legacy. Hatred, fear, and unreasoning hostility had possessed those men's hearts. With a heavy exhalation, he looked back at his old hound, seeing the spittle fly off Galactus' lips as he continued to twist his body towards the Milky Way. Was he happy? Galactus sure seemed happy. How ironic that even with all his power cosmic, Norrin could not quite place the true source of his strongest feelings. Or was he like that because of the power? The mysteries of the universe are truly without limit, he thought, probably for the billionth time. That's all Norrin knew for sure, that fact and the best way to pay tribute to it. Had she seen the end of it, Alicia would surely be justified in calling him callous, but there was nothing cold about his heart. How could there be, given the seemingly infinite amount of wonder he had beheld in this endless cradle of stars? Then he remembered that the Zenlavians had spent time in space too. Norrin felt his board stir impatiently, itching to soar, and he laughed, shaking himself from his reverie. There was a planet in the Carina Sagittarius only about 1,500 parsecs away where he could probably still get a hot shower, wash the earth off him, and hit the Delacostiche, a spot that he remembered had gotten the board pretty amped last time they passed that way. Norrin weaved unhurriedly through space for about 6,000 light years, working the cramps out of his too long terrestrial legs. Then, seeing a monster gamma wave about to break off a nearby pulsar, he circled around and let the board fly as fast as it wanted, launching them towards the crackling blue gas giant in the next arm that was his destination. Along the way, he palmed the stray silicaceous floater and tossed it to a school of fat purple Analax, who threw out dozens of spindly arms to claim it. The big blue marble swung around its star in an incredibly small orbit, only 4 stellar radii out to be exact. As they approached the planet, Norrin could feel the board suddenly realize that the accurate timing might not now be as important a factor as the uncanny velocity. Norrin wiggled his heel into the board to reassure his little buddy as they fell towards the tightly twirling planet. Like Sisyphus' boulder chained to a sun, it swung around and around, bigger each time as they closed in. The split second that the giant's atmosphere hit the board's snout, 1,700 degrees of heat conducted through both board and rider. Norrin felt his toes sink a bit as the board's chrome skin liquefied slightly for a moment before it knit its molecules back into a more aerodynamic seal. That's when he finally checked the board's speed. The oblivious planet engulfed Norrin and the board so quickly that he figured he might have smashed a man-sized silhouette right through its core if the board's reflexes had been rusty. They paused for only a second, the silicate falling from this world's sky in a downpour, beating on Norrin's shoulders and running down all sides of his bald head. Then they accelerated across the surface at a blinding speed. Norrin wiped the wetness off his eyes and bent forward, throwing his splayed hands back behind him, every pendant drop of molten glass turning to mercury the split second it touched the surfer's skin.
So I want to thank Openspace for doing this whole big thing and for asking us to read fan fiction to you guys. Justin Lucas is now going to read his story.
What is the podium better or is it the floor better? Have we come to a consensus?
I guess I'll stand here. So I'm standing here.
when I first knew I was going to do this project, I wasn't sure what I was going to write about, and I was talking to somebody about it, and I said, I think I'm going to write about Steve Irwin, the Crocodile Hunter, who you guys might know. And the person said something that I hadn't thought about, which is that they were like, isn't fan fiction supposed to be about a fictional person? And I was like, geez, I don't know. And then they were like, because like Steve Irwin's a real person. And I said, well, kind of. So my idea is that basically that he's an eternal person, and that's where I went with that. So it's pretty short. It's not terribly short, but it's not terribly long. I'm going to go through the whole thing if I can do it. And apologies if the Australian accent is not authentic. I cannot guarantee its authenticity. It's called Dreamtime for the Croc Hunter. A serrated barb tears through the khaki safari shirt, slipping between ribs and breaking off from the stingray's spine. It pierces the thoracic wall of Steve Irwin, the Crocodile Hunter, and releases its poison directly into his heart. The croc hunter clutches the stinger fragment and yanks it. Blood curls out from the hole in his chest and into the saltwater shallows. The cameraman shuts off his underwater camera. This video is later destroyed and we do not see the footage. Only the cameraman, the coroner, and the Queensland State Police will ever witness it. What they all see and what we do not is the precise moment when Steve Irwin's human body dies. What nobody sees, what the video cannot capture, is the croc hunter's spirit escaping that body. It rises out of the coastal waters and travels home to the Australia Zoo in Beran. The hunter's spirit moves swiftly and effortlessly, as though pulled. He passes south over the Coral Sea, down to the Sunshine Coast, and over to Beran. Upon reaching the zoo, he floats along familiar pathways, heading toward the area where the crocs are kept. Finally, he arrives at the enclosure belonging to Acco, oldest and largest of the park's saltwater crocs. Even after a lifetime spent among these fearsome reptiles, the hunter still can't help but exclaim at each encounter of Acco's magnificent and terrible form. Crikey, have a go at this big fella. Isn't he a beauty? Acco's jaws are like a sprung trap. He slurps a scrap of chicken gizzard. What a big, powerful salty. Isn't he just like a dinosaur? The hunter's spirit enters the body of the 16-foot crocodilian. He quickly stretches out to fill every scale, cell, and organ. The hunter makes the croc's tail whip and does a little roll on the embankment. He digs his claws in the mud and slinks back into the water at the enclosure until submerged. The crocodile's consciousness retreats. Acco dreams of mangrove swamps and crustaceans. The hunter's thoughts turn to his family. He thinks of his wife Terry and of his children, Bindi and Bob. Terry is fierce and practical. The hunter knows that she'll meet grief with efficiency. In their work together, the two faced many dangers and spoke often about the possibility of each other's death. Terry will be strong for their children. The children themselves are possessed with youthful optimism. They've been raised in the company of wild animals and taught from an early age to understand death as part of the natural order. They'll be all right, I reckon. That Terry's one tough Sheila. The hunter carries on narrating to an imagined audience. He's adopted a manner over the years of constantly speaking as though on camera. In his current form, these attempts at speech send puffs of air through Acco's clenched teeth. It makes little bubbles in the murky water around him. Elsewhere, the ancestor spirits of the Dreamtime have noted the great croc hunter's passing. They've summoned the spirit of Harriet, the giant Galapagos land tortoise. Harriet is chosen for her close ties to the hunter. The final decades of her 175 years on Earth were spent as beloved guests at the Australia Zoo. Now the ancestor spirits wish for her to return to that famous wildlife park and to deliver the croc hunter to his place among the spirits of the sky world. The hunter hears a gate swing at the corner of Acco's enclosure. He floats upward to have a look around and sees four figures clad in the familiar khaki uniforms of the Australia Zoo crew. They're walking towards the water's edge carrying a bucket of meat scraps, a burlap sack, and a lasso. As they move closer, the croc hunter gleefully recognizes his former team. Fantastic! That'll be Sue, Frank, Dave, and Bruce. Have a go at that lasso in Sue's hand. She's going to use that bit of rope to tie Acco's mouth shut. Sue doesn't want this big boy taking a bite out of any member of the crew. I feel like I should mention here that every sentence spoken by Steve Irwin ends with an exclamation point. Unless it's a question mark. The crew is going to transfer Acco to the Crocoseum for an afternoon show. Word of the croc hunter's death has not yet reached the Australia Zoo, and all the day's events are still proceeding as scheduled. The crew members scan the enclosure and spot Acco almost immediately. His position is easily given away by the bubbles produced from the hunter's continued attempts at speech. Dave starts tossing bits of meat from his bucket. They're going to use that food to lure us out on dry land. A big salty like Acco's a handful anywhere, but you'd never want to find yourself in the water with him. That's his territory. As the hunter keeps talking, Acco appears to be wildly spewing bubbles. The zoo crew understand this bubbling is a common territorial warning among crocs. They stand cautiously in wait of Akko's next move. The hunter suddenly realizes the message he's sending and opts to play the part. He dips back beneath the surface and glides toward the water's edge. All right, mates, here I come. Woohoo! The croc hunter thrusts Akko's body forward, mouth open. He snaps a raw chicken breast out of the air and swings the croc's head wildly. Dave lobs another piece of meat to the croc's mouth. The hunter sucks it down and Sue rings his upper jaw with her lasso. She pulls the rope taut and then works her end of it through a hole in the bottom of the burlap sack. The hunter jerks back sharply to tug at the rope. Frank, Dave, and Bruce leap onto Akko's back and spread across him with the full force of their weight. The hunter rocks the croc's body side to side to flop them around a bit, but the crew bear down and hold tight. Sue whips the sack down the line, and Bruce pulls it over Akko's head so that his eyes are covered. Everything goes dark. The hunter can feel the rope being wound around Akko's jaws, binding him shut, securing the bag over his head. The crew grasp him tightly and bear down even harder on his back, but their weight feels comforting and familiar. The hunter pretends that they know it's him and that they're embracing him rather than holding him down. At this moment, he hears something like a voice calling out to him. The sound doesn't come from any member of the crew. He can't even be certain that it is a sound, but it is calling out to him by name. Steve, it says. This is Harriet. I've come here with a message for you. Crikey, is that Harriet out there? The hunter rolls Akko's eyes around uselessly inside the burlap sack. I reckon Harriet must be around here somewhere. She's a giant Galapagos land tortoise. Steve, you must pay attention. I have an important message for you. What's that, girl? You got a message? The hunter interacts with Harriet as though he were on camera. I think Harriet's trying to tell us something. How do you like that? I've known this old girl more than 20 years. When Harriet died this past June, it felt just like I lost a member of my own family. Steve, please listen to me. I've come here to take you away. I need you to follow me. The zoo crew are hoisting Akko's body onto the bed of a small truck they back in the enclosure. The sensation of being lifted up in the arms of his old friends excites the hunter to distraction. He imagines returning with them to the Crocodile. That's also a real place. He pictures himself back at the center of the amphitheater, surrounded by a crowd of cheering visitors. A reptile handler would be enthusiastically describing the various aspects of Akko's awesome power, his incredible strength, his magnificent size, the length of his claws, and the strength of his death roll. The crowd would clap politely upon learning that Akko is more than 70 years old. There would be nervous gasps as he roared, hissed, and lunged toward the trainer. He would snatch more food out of the air, and children would be delighted. There would be cheers and laughter and vigorous applause. The thought of this experience is precious to the hunter, but he understands that it cannot belong to him. These cheers that he is imagining rightfully belong to Akko, as does the body that he now possesses. And doesn't he deserve it? What incredible crop! All right then, big boy, it's your body, fair dinkum, off I go. Harriet isn't certain what the hunter is going on about, but she decides against asking. The air crackles as the hunter's spirit separates itself from Akko's body. Harriet calls out to the hunter once more. Steve, please follow me. It's time for you to leave these earthly things behind. We must travel to the sky world, our places with these spirits of the dreamtime. Sky world? Crikey! The hunter zips around, tracing ecstatic circles in the air. How about that? A sky world! What an adventure! Woohoo! Having made up his mind, the hunter does not hesitate. He is reckless and exuberant. He remains possessed of that incredible and spontaneous drive which in life sent him chasing so eagerly after venomous snakes and dangerous reptiles. Let's go, Harriet, to the sky world! Woohoo! Harriet and the hunter soar rapidly upward. The Australia Zoo vanishes from sight as they ascend further and further above the continent. They do not leave the earth precisely, but rather they shift into the unseen and ever-present dreamtime. Earthly concepts of time and place lose their meaning. Previously hidden forms and beings emerge around them. Harriet trails behind the croc hunter with a look of anticipation. The hunter gushes with childlike joy at the sight of the otherworldly creatures now surrounding him. Are those lizard men I see over there? Unbelievable. And how about over there? Is that a half man, half emu? Fantastic. The hunter pauses a moment as though to search his memory, but is distracted again almost instantly. Crikey, have a go at that giant rainbow serpent. What a beauty. I mean, just look at the size of it, big as a river. Hello, beautiful. Don't mind me. I'm just having a look at you. The enormous snake slides around and folds back on itself in piles. It creates incredible heaps of shifting rainbow patterns that dazzle the hunter and immobilize him with wonder. Crikey! 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 He repeats the word like a mantra until it becomes strange and loses meaning. Crikey? Crikey. The serpent emits a powerfully loud and constant sound like raging water. The roar of the hissing rises and falls in tandem with the undulations of the ancient spirit's serpentine form. It rushes around him, and the hunter feels as though submerged. Patterns of color wash over him. His concept of identity slowly drowns in the serpent's weight. When at last he is fully relieved of it, he experiences a sense of euphoric release. Gone forever now is Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter of this most recent age. The last remnants of that earthly identity have finally been shed. Yet the eternal spirit of the great croc hunter has always existed in the dream time, and there it will reside until we do again.
Okay, so our last story is next, but before that, there are many, many other stories in here, and if you like those, there's so many more that you'll also like equally. Colleen O'Connell is now reading her story.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi. I knew you were about the Golden Girls because I'm a big fan and felt connected to them and I wanted to bring that here for you. Okay. I'm going to attempt very terrible accents. That was great, by the way. That wasn't a comment. That wasn't a backhanded comment. This is truly very interesting. Okay. There was a piece of pee on the handrail of the escalator. The electric steps themselves were blurry and moving at high speeds. The whole scene was terrifying, but Sophia braved the ride to examine the specimen. How high am I? She thought to herself. Shady Pines Retirement Home had recently prescribed her a new regimen of pharmaceuticals, and today she had felt like experimenting. A piece of pee, she said aloud. Pussycat, is that right? Does piss come in pieces now? Dorothy, her daughter, only a year or two from being a Shady Pines resident herself, replied, what are you talking about? This here, there's a shard of urine, I'm sure of it. Okay, what'd you take? Dorothy's voice was growing agitated. A little alprazolam for my anxiety. A little Percocet for my head pain. A little blanket. Ma, we get it. Can you just drop the club kid act for 10 minutes? We're almost there. Dorothy was in no mood for her mother's shenanigans. Not to mention, she was pretty high herself, and Sophia always made her a little paranoid. She just needed to take the edge off a little bit before coming face to face with Rose and Blanche's new life. Rose and Blanche had shared a home with Dorothy and Sophia for years in Miami. After Rose and Blanche had revealed that they were secretly dating, they kicked Dorothy and her mother out of the house. Ever since then, it was difficult for Dorothy to not scream obscenities anytime they reunited. They lost touch for years. But as of late, they were using a new electronic letter system to keep in touch. In part, Dorothy missed her old friends, but more than anything, she wanted to see them fail. Rose Rose hid the stores on the 3rd floor past We Go Nuts down a dark corridor. She didn't say what it was called. She wants us to be surprised, Dorothy said, baring her teeth. I hope they use my suggestion. Big old clothes for sluts and idiots, Sophia shot back. Ma, will you calm down? I think it's nice that they started a new business. Besides, maybe they used my idea, Forever 69. They turned the corner and there it was. Sexy St. Olaf secondhand steals? That name is horrible, Dorothy shouted, smirking afterwards. What the hell is that? Sophia pointed to the store window. There was a life-size cardboard photo of Blanche in Lacey Lederhosen, and only Lacey Lederhosen. The skin is corrugated, naturally corrugated. I haven't seen that much sagging since the hip-hop channel the home won't let me watch. As the pair came closer, they could hear arguing. But Blanche, Lederhosen aren't even Scandinavian. They're German, Rose's familiar voice complained. She was peeved. They're sexy. That's all that matters. Blanche added. And I look, they am good too. I do not agree at all. They're not even second-hand Lederhosen. You ordered them on that spider thing. The internet, Rose. It's called the internet. Knock, knock. Are we interrupting a lover's quarrel? Dorothy said as she and Sophia crossed the entrance. She took in the scene. The shop had low ceilings, beige carpet, and stained walls. The smell of rat vomit fought with the scent of sugar wafers. It was worse than she had imagined. She was pleased. All of her anger was quickly swept away by delight. Oh, Dorothy, Sophia, you came, shouted Rose. Of course we came. We really wanted to check out this dump, Sophia huffed. Oh, Sophia, I do miss your interesting humor. And Northa, you look, well. How are y'all? Blanche said. She spoke in thick, foamy southern lines, kind of like spoiled beef jerky. Dorothy's eyes were feeling dry. The weed was beginning to betray her. She couldn't focus on the simplest of questions. Yeah, interesting. So did you crack the front window for a rustic type look, or did they include it in the rental? She asked. Oh, stop teasing, Dorothy, Rose replied. We know it may be a bit of a fixer-upper, but we love it here. Rose couldn't help batting her eyelashes. Dorothy looked better than she remembered. Sure, she had drooping pendulum breasts and drawn-on eyebrows, but she seemed softer. Perhaps Rose thought to herself she had chosen the wrong woman all those years ago. Sophia was sick of the boring chatter and got low to the ground. Time to crawl off and have some real fun, she thought. She wormed her way towards the taffeta section. The fabrics felt smooth, but smelled of plastic. She made her way to the center of the rack, best to stay concealed from others, she thought. She was really tweaking at this point. A teenage girl entered the store, clearly combing the racks as an ironic gesture. Her eyes were rolling and her tongue was wagging out of the side of her mouth. She was transfixed by the shoulder pads and a wide selection of women's dickies. She was the perfect victim. Sophia peered through the ruffles and sequins at her prey. She would just come a little bit closer. The girl looked ripe for a good scare. But how best to frighten this fawn in the meadow? She searched her pockets for ideas. Have you had many customers? Dorothy inquired, deciding to feign politeness. Not yet, but we now have change in Norwegian kroners, so we should be flooded with patrons soon, Rose answered, beaming with pride. Yes, now these colored sheets of paper, Blanche added, with sexy mustachioed men with steaming glances that exude sexuality. They just stare long and tickle your bosom with one stroke of the tender brush above the belt. I once sat down on the leather stool at the register in a very short skirt, and several runaway bills got attached to my moist thighs. Blanche snapped out of her fantasy. Oh dear, I do believe we forgot to put the air conditioning on, and she ran out of the room. Wow, St. Blanche, huh? Dorothy asked Rose. Sure. Dorothy, are you seeing anybody? Rose was interrupted by a scream. Mom, what are you doing? Dorothy scolded. Sophia was standing on top of the clothing rack, gripping a young girl's perm in one hand and a lighter in the other, laughing maniacally. You think it's funny to come in here and stick at two old ladies' last pathetic attempt to do something meaningful with their lives? Time to burn, baby, Sophia screamed. Blanche had the air conditioning.
Okay, that was like fun. There's so much more